Welcome to the Private Wireless podcast series from Nokia, bringing you the insights that really matter around enterprise digital transformation and wireless solutions. The series covers technology comparisons, deployment best practices, total cost of ownership assessments, analyst reviews and reports to help you make the decisions you need for your business. So keep listening. We hear from John Burns, Service Director for Telecom Technology and Software at Global Data. Joining him is Ed Gubbins, Principal Analyst at Global Data, along with Kitty Weldon, who's also a Principal Analyst covering enterprise networking. They'll explore a number of key considerations when choosing a private wireless network.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening into today's discussion about private cellular networks and the importance of choosing the right partners. I'm John Burns, Service Director for Telecom Technology and Software at Global Data, and I'm joined by Ed Gubbins, who is Principal Analyst at Global Data covering radio access networks, along with Kitty Weldon, who is also a Principal Analyst covering enterprise networking. Now, it is appropriate that we are able to bring both a service provider and an enterprise perspective today because the topic we are discussing, private networking, is essentially about bringing the best of both worlds. Combining carrier-grade networking capabilities and emerging technologies such as virtualized RAN, edge computing, and automation to meet mission-critical networking requirements in a number of industries. And while we've been talking about private cellular networks for a few years now, the pieces of the puzzle are really just starting to come together to the extent that we're moving beyond the early deployments to more of a mass-scale deployment environment in the next couple of years. So for many enterprises, the decision whether to and then how to deploy private networks is really not one that they're prepared to embark on alone. Deploying the right technologies requires a particular level of expertise that most enterprises, frankly, don't want to have. They don't have it. And while the ongoing sort of day one, day two operational challenges bring a whole new set of considerations, they don't have the expertise internally to address them. So today we want to talk about a new global data report written by Ed and Kitty and myself that establishes a sort of a preliminary checklist of top 10 considerations that we think enterprises should be taking into account in choosing the best partners for building and optimizing and then ultimately running and supporting those private networks over the long term. One thing that we think is worth noting is that as we developed this list of criteria, we thought it was important to balance a number of overarching themes or areas, including the vendor's focus specifically on the needs of the various enterprise markets, the vendor's actual focus on the underlying technology, which kind of represents the plumbing underneath any private network deployment, and then finally a more general look at whether the vendor is really committed to the private network market for the long term. As it turns out, those areas loosely kind of fall, although not entirely, but loosely under the analysis of Kitty, Ed, and myself, respectively. So, Kitty, I'll turn to you now for the first item on our top 10 checklist, which is trustworthy partner. So within the context of a private network deployment, how does a vendor actually prove that they are trustworthy?
So thanks, John. So for me, the primary proof points of trustworthiness would include providing quantifiable SLAs agreed to by the customer, along with a history of compliance to similar SLAs among existing customers. And these would be for KPIs on things like repairs and service call completion, mean time to resolve, but also on achieved bandwidth for different traffic load and application conditions. And also important is, of course, providing evidence from labs and prototypes to verify proof of latency, availability, and reliability in real-world live test cases. And certainly references and endorsements from both end customers and channel and ecosystem partners that are used in successful deployments would help with trust. But there's a few other key issues that I would include. First of all, I think that the vendor having its own solutions rather than just providing a kind of an assembly of third-party elements is important, as is their ability to support both business-critical and industry or mission-critical use cases. And this often relates to supporting both IT and OT requirements. Having deep knowledge and experience in deploying diverse network and IT technologies in addition to private cellular, and also flexibility. So in offering a choice of both custom and prepackaged solutions, cloud-based SaaS or on-premise delivery options.
Okay, so it seemed as though the first factor in terms of trustworthy partners is sort of a basic foot in the door requirement, I think, for any vendor that you would be considering. And I think the next item you put on your checklist is a natural kind of next follow-on idea to think about, and that is the number two suggestion, proven track record in the enterprise. In other words, to what extent can the vendor showcase sort of repeated success in the enterprise segment? That's easier said than done, though, right? Considering that these are not really one-size-fits-all solutions.
Yeah, exactly. Because enterprises are unique. They have different use cases, different kinds of requirements from their vendors, and they're really all in kind of different stages of their own digital transformation. And each vertical also has different needs. So the vendor really needs to have reference customers in multiple industries that are willing to share insights. Also, enterprises deploy private networks for different reasons, and these can range from dedicated bandwidth for large amounts of data and analysis, or the need for very high speeds, high availability and reliability, or ultra-low latency. They may also have unique privacy and security concerns, so the vendor really has to show the flexibility to customize the network according to these needs. Also key is the fact that the partner must be able to both express and deliver outcomes. So this may require quantifying return on investment, describing productivity gains, helping with product and process improvements, or even helping the customer, achieve revenue gains. Each customer really has different expectations of what they're going to gain from the deployment. So one thing I think that is interesting, if we compare a couple of different use cases, these show how different private wireless deployments can be from each other, but also how different the role of the private wireless provider can be. So here's an example. A power company had deployed private wireless networks to exchange real-time data between its operations center and its smart meters, substations, and other energy generation sources. The proof of concept included connectivity to a subset of smart meters, load balancers, and concentrators using unlicensed LTE spectrum in this case. And in phase two, they extended connectivity to a larger service area, and they also automated smart grid operations so that all equipment could be viewed and managed via a single dashboard. And now the customer can really identify problem areas and remediate them and optimize load balancing. So in this example, the private wireless vendor provided network design, deployment, integration, assisted operation, maintenance, construction, and training. But in a second example, a mining exploration company was communicating using expensive and also bandwidth-limited satellite phones, and these devices could not communicate together locally. So one of the vendor's ecosystem partners offered a platform which solved these challenges by marrying rugged mobility with data and voice communications and computing capability. The solution enabled mining companies to reduce exploration analysis cycles from weeks to hours by connecting the exploration team directly to the head office, while local computing and data processing reduced the costs of the satellite backhaul. But in this case, the private wireless provider worked with a strong partner for deployment and integration, while primarily providing the LTE private wireless infrastructure and some of the endpoint equipment.
So a good example of two different vertical markets, some common denominators there, but ultimately two very different scenarios and different use cases. Thanks, Kitty. So the third factor, I'll turn to Ed Gubbins now, and that one is commitment to private wireless. And by this, we mean commitment both in terms of making sure that internally a vendor is committed for the long term, but also externally is the vendor actively engaged with the right organizations. So Ed, can you talk about both sort of the signs of that internal commitment and also discuss some of the activities and industry organizations that you were alluding to on this one?
Sure. And we should say first too that, just to underscore that this strong commitment to the private wireless business is important because these investments and these networks are going to last. So you need a partner that's got skin in the game and one that's in it for the long haul. You don't want to start going to market with a partner who's who might pull out of the space soon afterward, or one who just isn't responsive enough to the business because they're not committed enough. So how do you evaluate their commitment level? Well, as you alluded to, you can look at what they're doing both internally and externally. Internally, does the group within the company that focuses on this area have enough resources? Do they have enough independence to be responsive and not get bogged down in higher level bureaucracy? Does their solution set have a broad range of features in-house so that there's less need to rely on partners? Those are just some of the questions, about the company internally. And then externally, you can look at whether the company participates in industry standards groups and associations that are relevant to private wireless, like the OnGo Alliance, which focuses on CBRS shared spectrum in the United States, or the Multifier Alliance, which focuses on using LTE in unlicensed spectrum. And you can also look at whether the company is just blazing trails in the space, whether they're formulating and perfecting templates or blueprints for how to address specific verticals, whether they're demonstrating how to serve these use cases in a way that others follow. So a lot of the activity you see in the space now is just vendors and operators promoting these proof of concept scenarios in things like the mining industry, remote controlled dump trucks in mines, not just demonstrating that achievement, but devising the processes to repeat it and to optimize.
Yeah, I think repeatability is key in this scenario. Thanks, Ed. And now back over to you, Kitty. We were going to have you address the next two factors, actually, because they're almost two sides of the same coin. Number 4 factor is solutions adapted to enterprise needs, and number 5 factor is solution mindset. Number 4, solutions adapted to enterprise needs, refers to the adaptability in terms of the ability to cater to differing OpEx and CapEx consumption models, striking the right balance between standardization and customization and the like. Whereas number 5, solution mindset, really refers to the ability to put all the pieces of the puzzle together in terms of hardware, software, services, onboarding, security on an end-to-end basis. So do you want to talk about the kind of distinction between the adaptability challenge, which is number 4, and the kind of solution requirement, number 5, and what enterprises should be on the lookout for there?
Yeah, sure. So for number 4, when it comes to satisfying enterprise needs, to me, this means that the partner needs to support solutions of all types and sizes with flexible OpEx and CapEx models as options. And it should support all sorts of spectrum. So this could be licensed, unlicensed, lightly licensed, and share spectrum models. And it also has to strike the right balance between standardization and customization. It needs to balance simplicity with the ability to address individual use case requirements. So it can offer enterprise-owned or as-a-service options, or even an entry-level version for smaller deployments. And again, the governance, safety, and security needs may be different for the different verticals. Now, when it comes to a solution mindset, that's a little bit different. The vendor needs to offer an end-to-end option, whether or not they really are providing all the pieces themselves. So this means that it takes responsibility for securing and provisioning and supporting all of the elements of the solution, along with SLAs and a long-term commitment for the entire solution. Again, regardless of whether it developed it, integrated it, or mostly assembled it from third-party pieces. And also, a vendor has to or should offer use case and vertical blueprints. Not all vendors do it. I think this is increasingly important. So, for example, in manufacturing, it might explicitly help the customer support things like predictive maintenance, asset condition monitoring, digital twins, remote configuration and control, and also support of automatic guided vehicles.
And certainly even in manufacturing, there are multiple versions of manufacturing. So it's not as enough to say we support the manufacturing market. That means very different things in different contexts. So good thoughts there. Thanks, Kitty. So as I mentioned at the beginning, our checklist is sort of a combination of both our enterprise technology as well as a few more general support focus factors. So now we're going to turn to a couple that are more specific to the technology. I will address number 6 on our checklist, which is proven performance. In other words, so yes, as Kitty said, a solution mindset and an understanding of enterprise goals and desired outcomes is vital, of course, but ultimately, the vendor still needs to be able to deliver the goods in order to actually support mission critical deployments and support strict service level agreements. In the core, the private network core, we see an increasingly crowded market with a host of software companies advocating cloud native solutions, integrating open source and offering a complete mobile core solution that is optimized for private network scenarios. A number of these solutions are coming from startups, and they're really going after the private network use case scenarios. So all this innovation is potentially really great for enterprises, both in terms of keeping costs down and also maximizing efficiency. But when push comes to shove, enterprise will really actually need to gauge their comfort level with some of these startup vendors offering the potential for innovation, but a much shorter track record as compared to vendors whose product performance has been established over decades of continuous investment and numerous customer endorsements. So there's really going to be an evaluation of the trade-off between really going after the latest and greatest in terms of innovation, as well as the track record and the proven performance from some of the vendors that are out there. So that's proven performance, and that brings us to the next technology-related item on our checklist, number 7, which is flexibility, innovation, and future-proofing. So in many ways, this is a kind of a corollary to number 6, proven performance that I just mentioned, because we know that the standards are going to continue to evolve. Some deployments that begin initially as LTE will want to become 5G solutions eventually, and so forth. So what should an enterprise be looking for from their vendors to have some assurance that the deployments they're thinking about in 21 and 22 can still be viable in 2031, 32?
Well, you have to keep in mind that private wireless applies to a lot of very different enterprise verticals and scenarios. So to serve them, a partner solution set has to be broad and diverse enough to serve that wide variety of needs. So a partner has to be able to offer choices to meet, different requirements or preferences. Sometimes it's on-site solutions or centralized cloud-based solutions or, hybrid edge type infrastructure. It might mean having wireline and transport capabilities to complement the wireless. Things like narrowband IoT for the Internet of Things, small cells, macro cells, support for different types of spectrum. We talked about licensed or unlicensed spectrum. And don't forget things like millimeter wave or microwave even. And also, of course, as you mentioned, 4G and 5G. That's a good example of the fact that not only should a partner be able to offer lots of options, it also needs to have an evolution path to take enterprises through so that the network and its technology can evolve smoothly to meet future needs without needing to be ripped out and replaced in a costly way. So having solutions that can be upgraded easily, like through software downloads, that's important.
Sort of the future-proofing challenge. Okay, thanks, Ed. And that brings us to our final 3 checklist items. I mentioned earlier we have enterprise-oriented recommendations here and technology-related. The final 3 are really more of the general kinds of attributes that you'd be looking for in any engagement, but especially in private network deployments. Number 8 is long-term viability and stability. The reason why that is important, particularly in many private network scenarios, is that we're talking about operating environments, in many cases, factories, for example, where it's not uncommon to have a piece of machinery that does its job for literally decades. So that means enterprises need to choose vendors that will be there to support them over an indefinite period of operation. And that in turn requires stability. And granted, nothing is ever guaranteed, but there are some factors we think are important to make when you're making a strategic bet on companies that you expect to still be there 10 years or maybe far more than 10 years from now. One of those factors, which we've alluded to elsewhere here, is a proven track record. Only here, our thinking is sort of, success breeds success. So a happy installed base is also a pipeline for continued business in the form of upgrades and ongoing operations. Enterprises should also have a look at the vendor's R&D focus. Are they committed to a continuous investment cycle in support of technology innovation? In this case, we are thinking a commitment to spending more than 10% of revenue on R&D year in and year out as a minimum. And then number 9 on the checklist is to ask yourself whether you consider yourself, your vendor, to be a trusted advisor. That's a term that is probably overused, but it's really crucial in private network deployment scenarios. With the exception of companies that are actually in the tech sector, enterprises, as I mentioned earlier, are really not in the business of building networks. Utilities supply power, hospitals provide care, shipping companies get their containers off the barges and onto trucks to their destinations. So what are some of the factors to consider? First is actually showing a true and deep understanding of both the underlying technology and business objectives that a company is trying to achieve, both internally and as well as competitively. So the trusted advisor really has to understand the challenges that are keeping the CIO and the CTO, or these days the CTIO, up at night, but also have a relationship into individual lines of business and even CMO priorities within a given organization.
The private wireless vendor, needs a robust ecosystem to be able to provide an end-to-end solution. So the ecosystem may be providing a variety of different elements in the solution, even though the private wireless vendor might be supporting them end to end. And in order to do that, they really need some partner resources from the vendor. So these could include marketing, technical training, and sales guides. And often a partner portal is going to be provided, which includes training, sales tools, lead management, reseller events, and also ongoing communication. The enterprise also has to feel secure that the ecosystem can provide technical innovation on an ongoing basis. So, such as help with the evolution from 4G LTE to 5G non-standalone to 5G standalone for private networks. And what it really comes down to, it's really important to note that the vendor needs partners because the diversity and the volume of devices in the market ultimately is going to determine if this equipment is going to be affordable for enterprise adoption.
Agreed. Thanks, Kitty and Ed, both for your comments. And so just to wrap up here, as you've heard, given the multiple technological and business challenges that need to be considered, the decision on which companies to partner with is not to be taken lightly here. Companies that are strong on technology may not have the enterprise expertise to deliver specific business outcomes, while some enterprise-focused vendors may just lack this private cellular capabilities. And even if some companies check a lot of the enterprise and technology boxes, an enterprise still needs to feel confident that their vendors will be there to support them through what could be a very long deployment and operational cycle. So at the end of the day, we think you should look for the vendors that can check the most boxes. And we hope that our checklist has been helpful to you in that selection process. Have a good day.
Our thanks to John Burns, Service Director for Telecom Technology and Software at Global Data, alongside Ed Gubbins and Kitty Weldon, Principal Analysts at Global Data, for today's discussion. Thanks for listening to the Private Wireless podcast series from Nokia. Don't forget to subscribe and be the first to hear new episodes. If you're looking for more insights around all things private 4.9G LTE and 5G, contact the Private Wireless team at Nokia. To find us online, just search for Nokia Private Wireless and click Talk to an Expert to get in touch.